What if I told you that Jesus died for our debts, not our sins? They killed him for trying to proclaim the year of the Lord. That is the Jubilee year. The Jubilee year is when you cancel debts. With all of the debt bondage around in the world, thousands of years ago, it'd be considered the end times. Literally. Student debt should be canceled. The debts of third world countries should be canceled. It was customary in nearly all Near East societies, that includes Egypt, Mesopotamia, Sumer, that includes Rome. It was customary for rulers to cancel the debts of the citizens. Now, if you don't believe me, maybe you will believe Michael Hudson. This book is called And Forgive Them Their Debts. Michael Hudson has a ton of credentials. He worked for the UN. He formerly worked for Wall Street. He's extremely important. And he worked with Harvard Peabody Museum to write this book. Harvard Peabody Museum is the most prolific museum in the nation. Yeah, I mean, let's just get into some of these quotes, man. The idea of annulling debts nowadays seems so unthinkable that most economists and many theologians doubt whether the Jubilee year could have been applied in practice, and indeed on a regular basis. A widespread impression is that the Mosaic debt Jubilee was a utopian ideal. However, Assyriologists have traced it to a long tradition of Near Eastern proclamations. That tradition is documented as soon as written inscriptions have been found in Sumer, starting in the mid-3rd millennium BC. Instead of causing economic crises, these debt jubilees preserved stability in near all Near Eastern societies. Economic polarization, bondage, and collapse occurred when such clean slates stopped being proclaimed. So instability happened when debts were not canceled. Canceling debts brought social and economic stability. It was practical. It wasn't necessarily about, oh, this makes me feel good inside to do. This is how you make sure society doesn't crumble. What were debt jubilees? Debt jubilees occurred on a regular basis in the ancient Near East from 2500 BC in Sumer to 1600 BC in Babylonia and its neighbors, and then in Assyria in the 1st millennia BC. It was normal for new leaders to proclaim these edicts upon taking the throne in the aftermath of war or renovating a temple. Judaism took the practice out of the hands of kings and placed it at the center of Mosaic law. So this is something that was a secular proclamation. It wasn't even something religious. It's just what societies did, was cancel the citizens' debts. And then Judaism came along and decided it was that important that they put it at the center of their religion. By Babylonian times, these debt amnesties contained the 3 elements that Judaism later adopted in its Jubilee year of Leviticus 25. The first element was to cancel agrarian debts owed by the citizenry at large. Mercantile debts among businessmen were left in place. That sounds like the opposite of what we do today, right? I mean, think about 2008 with Obama and millions of people losing their house. But we bailed out the banks and didn't bail out the people. This is the opposite of what the Bible and these Near East societies did and thought was righteous and thought was how you stabilize society. We do the opposite today. A second element of these debt amnesties was to liberate bond servants, the debtor's wife, daughters, or sons who had been pledged to creditors. They were allowed to return freely to the debtor's home. Slave girls that had been pledged for debt also were returned to the debtor's household. Royal debt jubilees thus freed society from debt bondage, but did not liberate chattel slaves. A third element of these debt jubilees, subsequently adopted into Mosaic law, was to return the land or crop rights that debtors had pledged to creditors. This enabled families to resume their self-support on the land and pay taxes, serve in the military, and provide corvée labor on public works. So this is practical. This is practical to cancel the debts. It allows citizens to perform duties for society freely, sustain themselves, and help sustain society. It was often a battle between wealthy families, private creditors, and the society at large, or even the ruler of that society. This is history. This is history. Historically, this is what our most fantastic examples of civilizations have done, is cancel the debts of the citizens. And think about what canceling debt means. I mean, what I just read is talking about people who are enslaved because of debt, who are freed. This is about slave girls going home. Now think about today, especially with Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, here's an example, not even talking about Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he was involved somehow, but what I'm about to read from is Debt, the First 5,000 Years by David Graeber. Chapter 6, Games with Sex and Death. Consider the case of Neil Bush, George W.'s brother, who, during divorce proceedings with his wife, admitted to multiple infidelities with women who, he claimed, would mysteriously appear at his hotel room door after important business meetings in Thailand and Hong Kong. Quote, "You have to admit it's pretty remarkable," remarked one of his wife's attorneys, "for a man to go to a hotel room door and open it and have a woman standing there and have sex with her." "It was very unusual," Bush replied, admitting, however, that this had happened to him on numerous occasions. Were they prostitutes? I don't know. In fact, such things seem almost par for the course when really big money comes into play, Graeber then adds. Now listen to this next part. After all, who were those Thai women who so mysteriously appeared at Neil Bush's hotel door? Almost certainly, they were children of indebted parents. Likely as not, they were contractual debt peons themselves. This book also talks about how our practices today are not very different from ancient times. A lot is still the same, and that's an example. That is an example of how debt bondage was an ancient problem, but is still a modern day problem, and we just don't see it. We just don't understand it. Why don't we understand it? Because our knowledge has been colonized, is the short answer. We just aren't taught the history that we should be taught. The knowledge that we should have, I believe, is as important as learning how to breathe, is as important as learning how to walk, how to use one's brain. Because one's history is vital to survival. It's how you Don't repeat the mistakes of the past and how you're able to move forward. But we're currently stuck in a loop of confusion because we don't know this type of stuff. We're demanding debt cancellation, not on as massive a scale as what we need, and not as strong and not as organized, because there's still debate about, should or shouldn't we cancel debts. If we understood that putting third world nations, putting people into debt domestically and foreign is equivalent to the end times, we would do something. If we fully understood that freaking Jesus Christ was trying to cancel everyone's debt and that's why he was crucified, we might think of things differently. I don't think y'all heard me. I'm gonna keep reading. Jesus' first sermon and the tradition of debt amnesty. In the first reported sermon Jesus delivered upon returning to his native Nazareth, Luke 4, verse 16, he unrolled the scroll of Isaiah and announced his mission, quote, to restore the year of our Lord. Until recently, this meaning of this phrase was not recognized as referring specifically to the Jubilee year, but breakthroughs in cuneiform research and a key Qumran scroll provide a direct link to that tradition. This linkage provides the basis for understanding how early Christianity emerged in an epoch so impoverished by debt and the threat of bondage that it was called the end time. Jesus was both more revolutionary and more conservative than was earlier recognized. He was politically revolutionary in threatening Judaic creditors, and behind them the Pharisees, who had rationalized their rights against debtors. Luke 16, verse 13 through 15, describes them as, quote, loving money and, quote, sneering at Jesus' message that you cannot serve both God and money. The lending rabbinical school, in an age when creditor power was gaining dominance throughout the ancient world, the Pharisees followed the teachings of Hillel, now credited as a founder of rabbinical Judaism. He sponsored the prosbul clause, in which creditors obliged their clients to waive their rights to have their debts canceled in the Jubilee year. Dang, Hillel. When I first heard of Hillel, I was like, oh, this man lit. But now I see that's not cool, Hillel. To encourage people to waive their rights to have their debts canceled. Come on, son. Jesus' call for a Jubilee year was conservative in resurrecting the economic ideal central to Mosaic law, widespread annulment of personal debts. This ideal remains so alien to our modern way of thinking that his sermons are usually interpreted in a broad, compassionate sense of urging personal charity towards one's own debtors and the poor in general. There is a reluctance to focus on the creditor oligarchy that Jesus and many of his contemporary Romans blamed for the epoch's deepening poverty. So, specifically, Jesus was trying to cancel the debts of the citizens. If he was here today, he would be going around saying, cancel the third world people's debts, you bastards. Cancel the student debts. Cancel the debts that the citizens owe to private creditors. Do it now. I'm here to proclaim the year of the mother freaking Lord. Everyone's in debt bondage in some kind of way. The New Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins. Economic hitmen or EHMs, are highly paid professionals who cheat countries around the globe out of trillions of dollars. They funnel money from the World Bank, the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID, and other foreign aid organizations into the coffers of huge corporations and the pockets of a few wealthy families who control the planet's natural resources. Their tools include fraudulent financial reports, rigged elections, payoffs, extortion, sex, and murder. They play a game as old as empire, but one that has taken on new and terrifying dimensions during the time of globalization. I should know, I was an EHM. Claudine pulled no punches when describing what I would be called upon to do. My job, she said, was to encourage world leaders to become part of a vast network that promotes U.S. commercial interests. In the end, those leaders become ensnared in a web of debt that ensures their loyalty. We can draw on them whenever we desire to satisfy our political, economic, or military needs. In turn, they bolster their political positions by bringing industrial parks, power plants, and airports to their people. The owners of U.S. engineering and construction companies become fabulously wealthy. If we falter, a more malicious form of hitman, the jackal, would step to the plate. And if the jackals failed, then the job fell to the military. I don't think y'all hear me though. Statue of Liberty and the Liberty Bell, okay? I'm looking at the science, right? We watched Don't Look Up, right? And people are like, listen to the scientists. I'm listening to the scientists. Sorry, my lips are like mad dry. If you don't want to believe me, you don't have to. This is why I read from these books, so that it's not just me saying it. Y'all can hear from experts. I'm just a conduit for y'all to actually go follow these people and look up these people and actually listen to them. The Statue of Liberty and the Liberty Bell are basically representations of debt cancellation of liberty. It's because debt cancellation is not a trivial thing. To be free from it is to have liberty, because if you are debt free, you can live your freaking life. You can take care of yourself. You don't have to be a slave to someone else. You can do what you want to do. That's freedom. And today, debt bondage is our primary mode of how we do economics today in the world. I'm gonna get into third world nations in debt and how we have all these Western commercials of feed the children on the eyes of the angel shit. And it's like, oh, we gotta feed these children. Look, Africans don't know how to take care of themselves. Look, they so poor. No, we are enslaving the planet. Western nations are making it look like they're not doing it. Sorry, I'm going on a tangent-ish again. I'm always angry, bro. Modern American society retains many iconographic references that can be traced back to ancient Babylonia. Our nation's two most familiar symbols of freedom, the Statue of Liberty and the Liberty Bell, recall vestiges of an ancient tradition that has been all but lost since imperial Roman times. Liberty from bondage and from the threat of losing one's home, land, and means of livelihood through debt. To a visitor from Hammurabi's Babylon, the Statue of Liberty might evoke the royal iconography of the important ritual over which rulers presided, restoring liberty from debt. The earliest known reference to such ritual appears in a legal text from the 18th century BC. A farmer claims that he does not have to pay a crop debt because the ruler, quite likely Hammurabi, who ruled for 42 years from 1792 to 1750 BC, has, quote, raised high the golden torch to signal the annulling of agrarian debts and related personal barley obligations. The freaking Liberty Bell has Leviticus 25 written on it. Should our Babylonian visitor proceed to the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia, he would find further vestiges of the idea of absolution from debt bondage. The bell is inscribed with a quotation from Leviticus 25, verse 10. Proclaim liberty throughout all the land, and to all the inhabitants thereof. The full verse refers to freedom from debt bondage, when it exhorts the Israelites to, quote, hallow the 50th year, and proclaim liberty throughout all the land, and to all the inhabitants thereof. It shall be a jubilee unto you, and ye shall return every man unto his family, and also every woman, child, and house slave who had been pledged. Lands were restored to their traditional holders, clear of debt encumbrances. Sounding the ram's horn on the Day of Atonement of this 50th year signaled the renewal of economic order and equity by undoing the corrosive effects of indebtedness that had built up since the last Jubilee. This is in the Bible. This is in historical texts. This is in the freaking Rosetta Stone. What helped settle matters was the Rosetta Stone. Nearly everyone knows that this trilingual Egyptian inscription provided the key for reading and understanding hieroglyphics after it was dug up by Napoleon's troops in 1799. What is almost always overlooked is what the stone reports. It was a debt amnesty by a young ruler from the Ptolemaic dynasty, a lineage founded by one of Alexander the Great's generals in 314 BC. The stone's inscription commemorates the cancellation of back taxes and other debts by the 13-year-old Ptolemy V Epiphanes. Sorry if I messed that up, man. In 197 BC, evidently indoctrinated by Egypt's priesthood into the ways of emulating former pharaohs. Oneness versus the 1% talks about indebtedness in agriculture, particularly in India with Indian farming, due to what's called structural adjustment programs imposed by the IMF and the World Bank. In certain parts of India, a condition is that farmers have to use certain farming inputs, whether it's machinery, whether it's GMO seeds, have to use these inputs from Western corporations. The result has been farmers going into debt because these GMO products, these machines, these fossil fuel and chemical high-cost inputs do not produce enough to pay back the debt. And so they commit suicide. This says, industrial agriculture based on toxics and fossil fuels is the main driver of both the sixth mass extinction and climate change. High-cost chemical farming has trapped farmers in debt, emptying out the countryside. More than 3 million Indian farmers have committed suicide because of indebtedness. Truly digest everything I've read and evaluate the society we live in, the world that we live in. Truly digest. People are dying. The world, the earth is dying. At least our habitat is dying. The earth will be here regardless if humans are here or not. It will self-correct. We need to spread knowledge. We need to raise our consciousness We need to raise our consciousness because collective action is what needs to happen. Private property needs to be put back into the public domain. We need to reclaim the commons, the free commons. We need to be able to be self-sufficient, to be self-sustaining. We get all of our needs externally. We don't know where our food comes from. We don't know where our clothes comes from. We don't know where anything comes from. It's all external because our property, the public property, has been grabbed and is taken by private creditors, by private hands. That's it for this episode of 3.5. Thank you for listening. And I hope you learned something.